Hello and welcome to a new year with InRetroSpect. I am Daniel Frost, and as always, I am surrounded by some of my InRetroSpect brethren in Sam Turner.
You've served your purpose. You may die now.
Peter Willington.
Deep throat.
And Chris Darby.
What's that noise?
Now, being as it's the new year, InRetroSpect will be giving you something very, very special. Over the next month, the usual selection of gaming analysis will be having a well-deserved New Year's rest. For the first InRetroSpect month of the year, we will be taking a special look at a particular gaming franchise, looking at how it has such an influence over the way we play and interact with games, socially and critically. So be prepared, as during the next 30 days, InRetroSpect will be poking and prodding the sleeping beast that is Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid. So what can you expect? Well, it's all going to be pretty simple, and you won't really have to do a thing. Just simply tune into and download each podcast as you normally would, as Sam, Chris, Pete and myself cast our eye over where this franchise has come from, how it's changed, and what impact it has made today. Over the coming weeks, there will be a close look at each main console release of our generation. During the next 4 weeks, all of the major titles in the series will be detailed and analysed like only InRetroSpect knows how, all finishing off with another special episode in 30 days' time. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say we will critically look at the franchise, as I think we'd all freely admit to loving this series. What these shows will do is look and discuss why we love them, and what impact they have had on our gaming since we first met Solid Snake. First though, before we do anything else, we have to clear something up. And that this will not be a spoiler-free show. In fact, it will be completely spoilerific. So if you haven't yet experienced Metal Gear, then one, what are you playing at? Go play it now. And two, when you've finished, come back and listen. I promise we'll wait for you. Okay then, so there's nothing left to do but kick off our InRetroSpect special by looking at the PS1 classic Metal Gear Solid. Welcome to InRetro Solid. So first, let's set the scene, and to do so, we turn, as ever, to the ever-faithful and ever-truthful World Wide Web. Released in 1998, Metal Gear Solid is set 7 years in the future, and follows Solid Snake, a soldier who infiltrates Shadow Moses, a nuclear weapons facility to neutralize the terrorist threat from Foxhound, a renegade special forces unit. Snake's task is to liberate 2 hostages, the head of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, and the president of a major arms manufacturer. He must then confront the terrorists and stop them from launching a nuclear strike. All in a day's work for Solid Snake. So here we are. It's 1998, the PlayStation has launched and Solid Snake has made his debut on the console, and in doing so makes his first foray into the realms of 3D. To start off, I'm curious to hear from you guys what your first experiences of this game were. Did you know much about it, or was it word of mouth? Or had you played the MSX version? Basically, Pete, I'd like to know what's your first memory of Metal Gear Solid?
Well, the first memory of it is seeing a massive review of it in official PlayStation magazine back when it was released originally. This was in the times when, obviously, I think we were all, still at school and still in secondary school, and And this is when magazines got brought into the playground and everyone would kind of huddle around them and see what all the latest hot jams were. So I saw a review of this Metal Gear Solid when I was flicking through it. And it looked really cool. It looked really interesting. And the reviewer was talking about it really emphatically. So I thought, well, this sounds like something I would probably be quite interested in. And I remembered back and was kind of thinking, I remember Metal Gear. Metal Gear was on my NES, wasn't it? Like, my friend had a Nintendo, and it was a 2D sort of side-on stealth them up, I suppose. And it wasn't really a game that got much, action. It didn't really get chucked into that machine very often because we were kind of, 6 or 7 at the time when we were sort of playing on our NES. So this was one of the first times when I was like, oh, right, okay, so games get updated. Games can kind of come from one era and be rebooted, I suppose, and, move into another. And that was quite sort of, so, that was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll go and check out this Metal Gear Solid. And then it was about 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year later, and my friend got the game for his PlayStation and was playing it, and he said, oh, you've got to play this game, it's really, really good. And I remembered sort of seeing it in this magazine and thinking, yeah, okay, well, you've got it, I've got a PlayStation, fantastic, lend it to me and maybe I'll play it. And that's kind of where it went from there.
My first sort of foray into Metal Gear Solid was through this title. Actually, the same as you, Pete, it was through the official PlayStation magazine. It had like 3 or 4 pages of this review. And what piqued my interest was the fact, if I remember correctly, it's always stuck with me, this review, because I've never read a review like this before, where, at the end they have the ending bits, they're summing up. They called it the best game ever made. And I thought, God, this is it's 1998, the game's just come out, and it's the best game ever made. Okay. I didn't have a console at that point, so I was just saying I gleaned from going around to my mates' houses. But I remember the year we got a console for Christmas, and you get your console, you get like one game that comes free, but you also got like in a little cardboard case, you got a little PlayStation disc of demos and games that were coming up. And I remember putting on the E3 trailer from 1997 of Metal Gear Solid and being absolutely bowled over by it. It was basically just a film trailer, an action film trailer that just happened to be computer graphics, 3D graphics. It blew me away, and I thought, yes, I want to do that. I want to plant a load of Semtex and C4 all over this place, blow it up, and then jump out just in time for the explosion with this fantastic orchestra of music around me. Yeah, I want to do that. I want to sneak around the place. I want to be this sort of James Bond action hero sort of person. And it had a massive effect on my life before I even played the game. And it all started from just that little review and that little trailer.
I can't remember where I first heard about Metal Gear Solid. It must have been, because this was the time in 1998, it must have been word of mouth, or just that I'd read a review that sort of piqued my interest. And at the time, PS1 belonged to my brother, and he was a bit older than me, so he was allowed to play it a lot more than I was. I didn't really have any money coming in to buy any games. My mum wouldn't really buy any games for us, so it was kind of like his toy, his thing that he played with, and that was fine. Until there was this magazine that I used to read quite a lot called Play magazine, and there was this competition that used to be in it called Student versus Teacher, where basically each week or each month a group of 3 students from school would take on 3 of their teachers. The magazine would come in, and you'd go head to head on playing certain PS1 titles, and whoever wins gets £1,000 either worth of games or stationery for their school. So me and 2 other friends, we wrote into this competition and we got accepted for it. So they came to our school and they set up the games, and we played like International Track and Field, Cool Borders 3, I think we had a race on Gran Turismo 4 and stuff like that. But it turned out that we won. And so we got basically £333 each to spend on whatever video games we wanted. And they gave us this big list of video games. It was about 4 sheets, just top to bottom, A to Z, of every video game that ever been released for the PlayStation 1, and they were just literally said, choose 10, send us a letter, and we'll send them to you. And this was absolutely brilliant. And I went through the list, and the first one I chose off that list was Metal Gear Solid. And I still to this day remember the day that my mum had rang me to tell me that this massive box had basically turned up for me at the house. Literally, you're talking a box that's about 2 foot long and maybe a foot wide, just full of games, just literally 10 games just landing on your doorstep. And I knew that Metal Gear Solid was one of those, and I spent the whole school day just excited, just really, really pumped up, ready to go home and play this game. And then I turned it on, and the game just scared me. I was so utterly scared of Metal Gear Solid because, and obviously we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but it was because it just did things that I never thought could be done in a computer game before, and that just kind of scared me, because then this technology that I'd always been sort of apart from, and obviously really enjoyed, because obviously I was reading the magazines, I was playing it, but suddenly this technology was starting to interact with me. I wasn't just interacting with a piece of lifeless grey plastic. Suddenly things were happening on screen that I felt involved with, and they were reacting back to me for the first time, and part of that, especially with one character, just really scared me. And I was literally at one point thinking that I didn't want to go back to the game at certain one point, because it scared me that much, because it was just an experience that it's just been one of my favourite moments of remembering, of winning that competition, and just knowing that if I'd never if applied for that competition, if I'd never done that, I would have never probably ever played Metal Gear Solid at that time, which I think was a crucial bit.
What was your first thought when the start of the game and you see that opening sequence where he's underwater, the iconic moment where he gets out the water of the dock under Shadow Moses? What were your immediate feelings on the game and the first impact that it gives you as it loads up?
Well, I don't really know. I don't really remember much of how I felt at that time, because I wasn't expecting to feel anything. I mean, the first time I booted it up, I didn't even know there was this whole bit where he got into the tube and got shot out. I just thought you started in the water, because that's what computer games sometimes do. I wasn't expecting there to be any deep story attached with it. I just skipped it.
I remember exactly how I felt, and this might come as a bit of a shock. I absolutely hated the first 5 minutes of my experience of Metal Gear Solid. Basically, for me, a big part of games, like one of the first things that I do usually is kind of understand what all the controls are. So like I'm usually, like most games will plant you in a big space. You're very safe, and it allows you to run around, kind of understand what up, down, left and right does, what all the little buttons do, what all the shoulder buttons do, all that kind of stuff. Kojima puts you in such a small, confined area of space to begin with. Kojima puts you in this really small area of space. It's actually kind of claustrophobic, and I know that he's done that he does that on purpose, definitely. But it meant I couldn't understand what the controls were, and I couldn't get used to doing stuff. And so,
and it's like it's like that thing where you go up against the wall, and then you go, no, I didn't want to go up against the wall.
Yeah.
And then you press X to crouch down, and then you try and move forward, and then you lie against the floor. And I still do it on Metal Gear Solid to this day. I still do it when you get noticed by an enemy and you're lying on the ground, and then you press X and you think you're standing up but you're not, and then you move forward and then you go back to lie on the ground. And it's like, I understand exactly where you're coming from, Pete, because that first bit, in terms of difficulty, straight away learning how to get used to the mechanics of the game and understanding for the first time that there's really a good solid AI platform going on.
Those first 15 minutes, really aren't easy. Like, there's some of the hardest parts of that game, like theoretically, are like within the first 15 minutes. I mean, there's the first bit where you have to deal with those two guards, and you're very, very much getting used to the controls, understanding how things work, making sure that you don't lean up against something and tap it to alert all the guards and that kind of thing. And if they know where you are and you're still in that starting area, you're actually a complete sitting duck. It's really bad. And I the first time I played it, I ended up getting an alert and diving into the water and sort of like swimming around, and it was really, really frustrating, and I nearly turned the game off. I was really, really annoyed at it, but I thought, well, I'm gonna give it another chance. But the second thing that you have to contend with is getting past the searchlights. The third thing that you have to contend with is getting past all of the cameras to actually insert yourself into the building itself. There's some really difficult and challenging moments within the game's opening, and that's initially a little bit off-putting, especially to a kid of about 14, 15 years of age.
That's what I liked about Kojima, though, because as you talked about, Pete, yeah, I agree, there's an element of claustrophobia, but as soon as you go up to that lift, it really hits home. You suddenly confronted with this incredibly extraordinary vista of Shadow Moses, and you instantaneously feel agoraphobic. You like yearn for the cover of somewhere because you've gone from this very compressed space and you're just confronted with this open vista, and you know where you've got to get to, and it just doesn't look possible.
You do go from a claustrophobic to an agoraphobic space, and that is a very, very clever subconscious way of telling the player, if you are open and you are exposed, you have all of these issues to have to deal with. And though you might not have liked, sneaking and being very much cramped within a contained environment and peeking around corners and that kind of stuff, actually these kind of environments will save your life. Kojima does a really great job of showing so much of the mechanics in that opening section, much more so than 2, 3, or 4 in that way, because you initially deal with footprints in the snow, footprints left by water, sound going over metal grating. You deal with searchlights, you deal with cameras, you deal with all of these massive genre-changing play mechanics, and he introduces them all so quickly, and it's a case of learn or die.
But I think the best analogy I can sort of think to describe how this game works is it's kind of like a game of chess in which your opponent can't see your pieces, but you can see where they're moving theirs, and you kind of have to move your pieces around them tactically. And I think this is one of the first games that kind of taught waiting.
It's interesting that for an action game, there is so much inaction. For an interactive medium, there is so much time spent not doing anything and just watching, and it actually makes more sense to stand still and kind of play a very stilted kind of game,
And what I really like is how Kojima kind of finds that element of separation. There's plenty of time for you to do this sort of step-by-step stealth, but then he makes sure there's this sort of cathartic purging for those who want a bit of blood and die-hard action where you can get to boss battles and just shoot, empty a load of bullets into varying sort of bosses for hours. He's very clever.
Was there a certain point in this game that really stands out for you guys in terms of that really cemented the fact that this wasn't just a normal game, this was a very excellent special game? Is there a particular moment that you can remember where you sat back and thought, yes, this is something special?
For me, it was that whole sequence. When you make it at the very beginning, you've just, as we talked about before, you're thrown into it. It's not an easy ride. And then you manage to jump into the elevator after hiding behind a forklift truck for about 2 hours while it takes a lift to come down. You jump into the lift and you leg it up the top. And then suddenly it cuts to the film sequence. And you get this frogman slowly takes off his swimming gear. And then he turns around just as Metal Gear Solid appears across the top. And you're like, and it's like, oh, and that's when I started to get goosebumps. I didn't know why, because I had no knowledge of the Metal Gear universe, but I felt goosebumps. I felt, this guy's got a story. This is going to be a good ride. And then you get to the top, and then it is before you, Shadow Moses. It was like I was in a James Bond movie or something. It's amazing. I thought, wow, I get to do this. I get to do what James Bond does. I get to be a lone spy, operative, saboteur, terrorist, agent. I get to do all this myself.
For me, the moment that really absolutely messed me up and made me think the hardest about video games that I will always remember about Metal Gear, and that's that there's a lot of brilliant fourth wall breaking moments, but the bit where you're told to look on the back of the box for a codec frequency, I think that is absolutely amazing. That's a standout quality moment. When I was asked to find the code on the back of the box, I spent hours and hours trying to find a box. So I got really, really super frustrated. I went to school the next day, so I turned it off and went to school the next day. I was kind of talking to my friend who'd lent it to me, and they basically said, yeah, that's actually on the back of the box. I was like, yeah, but what box? Like, the box. And it turned into this 5-minute conversation of him sort of saying, the box. And me not grasping that actual codec frequency, something that actually mattered within the game, was to be found on the box itself. And that absolutely blew me away. When I was told that, I remember this moment of just thinking, wow.
For me, it was a feeling of being absolutely petrified, that this game was being able to control and do something, and I felt not in control of the game, which is really embodied by Psycho Mantis totally. Psycho Mantis is kind of the Andy Kaufman, basically a sinister Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman would play these jokes, and they were only jokes to him because he would only know that he was doing them. For example, during one of his comedy shows once, he forced the producers to cut it and put in loads of static because he thought it would be funny that people would get up from their seats and knock the TV thinking it was broken, but it wasn't broken. And that is that feeling of not being of not being in control and the audience not knowing what was going to happen next, which he found funny. Whereas he did like that, Psycho Mantis turned it into something quite sadistic and quite really just outright scary for me when he first sort of popped up, and there was this, he sort of floated and could control people and force people to do things, and I didn't like that. And then when you first battle him and suddenly your screen goes black, and then the Hideo vision pops up, and I actually thought that my computer had gone wrong, because I had no idea who this Hideo was. So I was just like, well, what's wrong with my TV? And I actually flicked around the channels to try and find it again within that time that I'd already died. And what's so brilliant about the game in Metal Gear Solid is that so much of your progress is passed on by word of mouth. Like the thing with changing your controller from port 1 to port 2 is not really explained in the game. It's just something that, like the number on the back of the box, I picked up just by word of mouth. I knew to do it to get through the Psycho Mantis. But before then, the fact that, he made the pad rumble, which for some reason I thought even that was astounding, and the fact that he read your memory card and knew what games you were playing, it was just this feeling that this game was trying to interact with me. And before then, games had always been a me and them. It was never us. It was never an us experience. It was always put it on, play it, turn it off, don't interact with it again until I put it on again. But this game was just trying to, at each point, trying to pull me in and make me realise that you've got to be immersed in this, you've got to join us for this. And Psycho Mantis, as scary as it was, and as generally threatening in his nature that he was a perfect tool to bring you into this world and make you realise that if you hadn't got it by now from what Psycho Mantis is doing, that you've got to try and immerse yourself in this game because it's really trying to do it. And for me, that was just that moment, that was just that clicking point when that happened. And also the relief that I'd finally beaten this guy who'd been scaring me witless for the past couple of hours.
For me, I think the reason Psycho Mantis is so frightening is simply because he has the power to come out of the screen, essentially. Like that telekinesis moment with the put your controller on the table and I'll make it move with the power of my mind. That was so affecting and so shocking and so new that when he did that, because he was a creepy character anyway, you started to think, well, what else can he do? And the fear just comes from the unknown. It's a very simple mechanic of you do not understand what this person is going to do next to you. And, whether that's turn off the screen or control your friend who you've been, who you've spent the last 45 minutes, hour with to do something completely out of the blue, whether that's move something in your actual living room.
It's amazing how, I really agree with Sam, how I think it's also part of the graphics as well. It's got a very distinct texture, this game, which I love. It's part of the reasons I love it, which is one of the reasons why I don't like Twin Snakes. Metal Gear Solid's got its very distinct palette on the PlayStation, which becomes all part up of it. The grime of Shadow Moses, that sort of that rust aspect of it, and sort of the barely perceptible detail on the faces, how it manages to convey such emotion with all that, I think, that sort of 32-bit sort of graphics. It's incredible. And how Kojima manages to kind of, in that brief ending epilogue to Psycho Mantis' life, where he just opens the door from behind the bookcase, how he not necessarily redeems himself, but how he completely changes your perspective on him. You're no longer afraid of him. You've beaten him. But you've not just beaten him in a way like, ha ha ha, You feel as if you've done it with there's a sense of nobility in how you've beaten this man.
The fourth wall that Metal Gear Solid broke down, how has this now affected games that we play now?
There are examples of games that did break the fourth wall before this, but they'd never done it in a meaningful way. So, I mean, actually, there's a fairly famous game that we don't think of as fourth wall breaking, which is the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. If you leave Sonic standing still for a while, he'll shake his finger at the screen.
Spyro does the same.
Spyro does the same. Like,
if you leave him, he'll turn around and look at you going, what are you doing? He just turns around and looks at you. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Sorry, no.
There are games that have done it, but I think you're right. There were no games that have done it with so much punch.
I think it's because it did it in with a physical sense. There was a physical thing outside of the game, rather than just a nod to the screen, as you say with Sonic. It was, as you say, it was making your controller move in front of your eyes.
Breaking the fourth wall is a fairly complex idea. It's, you know, like we talk about it a lot, like it's nothing now, but it's just because it has so permeated games culture and film culture more now. But it did used to just be very much theatre. And the fact is that the important thing was not breaking the fourth wall. It was having a designer that thought that games could be more, that games could be intellectual. They could deal with high concept and that kind of thing. And I think that when you see the games that kind of came after Metal Gear Solid, especially like a year and a half, 2 years, you know, when they've had like a full development cycle, maybe a year, that kind of thing, we did start to see games that were trying to approach more difficult subjects or trying to think of games in a higher way. And in fact, you know, the late 90s, early noughties, there was this kind of general consensus feeling that games were growing up and they were becoming mature and they weren't just the domain of geeks anymore. And I think Metal Gear Solid was really integral to the games that would come afterwards.
I don't think it even breaks the fourth wall. I've never thought Metal Gear Solid's breaking the fourth wall because, as you say, Pete, the fourth wall was a complex thing. It originally started with a French theatre director called André Antoine for a theatre group called the Théâtre Libre, the Freedom Theatre. And it became appropriate because he was one of the first people, he'd stage his realist and naturalist sort of plays, where he quite often have his actors having their back to the audience, and it became known as the Theatre of Antoine's Back. And if you think about it in gaming, quite for a lot of the time with the avatars we're playing with, except in FMVs, we do just have them staring at their back for a lot of them in third person, for example. And what I think Metal Gear Solid does, which is a lot more complex, is the fact that it's kind of like, you know, like in detective films, you have that bit of that one-way mirror, one-way glass. There's a sense, or the sense of a seance. There's the fact that they're showing an awareness that something's there, but it's kind of incidental. They're talking out loud, but they're not expecting anyone to talk back to them. They're providing hints. It's not like the equivalent of which you tend to get at the beginning of games, which I think is very much breaking fourth wall. Where in some games where you got to type the character's name in, and that would be the characters. You could type your own name in, and then it all be about you. It's definitely asking for your physical input in changing the mechanics of this game to make it all about you. Or it says, okay, to do this, press the square button, press the triangle button, press the circle button. Whereas here it's kind of press the action button, or press action or something like that, or press the select button to operate the codec. But that's kind of a meta thing anyway.
Well, it doesn't break it; it just cements the wall around you. It's not like, as you said, it's not using any really overt techniques to remind you that you are playing a game. It just tries to bring you into its world of its game.
Do you think that it kind of, instead of breaking the fourth wall, it kind of pushes the fourth wall back and brings the player in?
Yeah, of course,
that's a really good point.
Because it knows it's a game. You know, you know that you are playing a game, but within this game it has its own world. It's a world where there are genome soldiers, where there are people with telekinesis abilities, there are people who have an affinity with ravens and nanomachines and all this kind of technology. It knows that within this world there is this game and you are playing this character. And as of course you find out in later, and certainly in Metal Gear Solid 2, you find out that really all Shadow Moses was an experiment. It was a game. You know, you were playing a character in a role. You're playing Snake as it was a training exercise. It's not breaking the fourth wall in respect as making you think you are playing a game, because it wants to make you think you're playing a game, because really Snake is. He's just playing out an exercise. So it really is just enforcing it and just saying, look, we're doing all this stuff because we want you to invest in this world a lot more heavily. We want you to believe in it. So we're bringing a bit of the world out to you. And it's like that moment, that's just that horror film moment of someone reaching through a mirror or reaching through a screen, and you accept that hand and then they just pull you into that world, that Alice in Wonderland moment where you're dunked into Wonderland. It's just that technique to bring you into it.
Just to support what you said, Sam, because I totally agree. Kojima actually said, if the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there's no point in making the game.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago was attacked and captured by next-generation special forces, members of Foxhound. They're demanding that the government turn over the remains of Big Boss, and they say that if their demands are not met within 24 hours, they'll launch a nuclear weapon. You'll have two mission objectives. First, you're to rescue DARPA Chief Donald Anderson and the president of Armstech, Kenneth Baker. Both are being held as hostages. Secondly, you're to investigate whether or not the terrorists have the ability to make a nuclear strike and stop them if they do.
What's the insertion method?
We'll approach the disposal facility by sub.
And then?
We'll launch a one-man SDV. After the SDV gets as close as it can, dispose of it. From there on, you'll have to swim. High-Tech Special Forces Unit Foxhound. Your former unit, and one that I was a commander of.
So they're still around.
There are 6 members of Foxhound involved in this terrorist activity. Psycho Mattis, with his powerful psychic abilities. Sniper Wolf, the beautiful and deadly sharpshooter. Decoy Octopus, master of disguise. Vulcan Raven, giant and shaman. And Revolver Ocelot, specialist in interrogation and a formidable gunfighter. And finally, in charge of them, Foxhound squad leader, Liquid Snake.
Liquid Snake?
The man with the same code name as you. The nuclear weapons disposal facility covers the whole island. I'll instruct you by codec after you reach your target.
Anyone going with me?
As usual, this is a one-man infiltration mission.
Weapons and equipment OSP?
Yes. This is a top-secret black op. Don't expect any official support.
It's a very simple story, and that's it. And it's set within a framework of a man is sent on a mission to save the world, and like we've seen that storyline hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It's a very simple setup. You know, one man on a mission. So yeah, very much like James Bond, and it takes a lot of inspiration from sort of James Bond movies, sort of Western spy films. There's a film that Chris is going to tell me the name of that stars Snake's namesake, Pliskin.
Escape from New York.
There you go. Yeah, Escape from New York. It's inspired a lot by that. You know, so it's a very simple story in that way. The cloning sort of subplot, which is what it is ultimately, because the main plot is man saves day. The subplot is not particularly confusing. We understand cloning now. It's not a million miles away from the science of today. You know, we understand that there is liquid and solid, and they are genetically brothers because they are from the same clone. And then the genome soldiers are essentially additional copies of those, but sort of less so. So they are kind of weaker, let's say. My point I'm trying to make anyway is that the story is always seen as really convoluted and really complex, and this is definitely something that I'll be touching on in my podcast. Actually, it isn't that complex. It's very wordy and filled with metaphor, but as long as you can kind of read subtext, and as long as you kind of go with Kojima, as long as you kind of trust him, as long as you have that same sort of mind state as when you're watching a Studio Ghibli film or you're watching a Disney movie or something like that, where you just say, okay, this is something that happens in the world, and you trust everything that's being told to you. As long as you kind of trust the guy that's kind of telling this story, none of it is really that complicated. There are moments where things get a little bit too heavy-handed with the metaphor and too heavy-handed with extrapolation upon a point, that kind of thing. But it's really not that hard a story. I mean, is it?
It's the difference between taking a book and then just skimming through the book and then trying to take in the plot that way, or literally doing it page by page as you should. And then I think it becomes easier when you do it that way, obviously, but I think then you realise that you're not actually reading a book, you're actually just reading a chapter in a book. And there's another chapter to follow, and another chapter which changes the perspective of the previous chapters. And then you get MGS3, which is set beforehand but has been written later. It's the links between games, not necessarily within the game itself, I think. That's the only aspects of the plot I particularly struggled with. And I think that was only really particularly with MGS2. MGS4 was, everything was sorted for me. The amount of times I went, through MGS4 was just, you could have, turned it into a drinking game or something.
Well, just, I mean, as you say, I mean, if it is quite a simple story, and as Pete, you mentioned, it's not a new story. I mean, it's a story that we have heard. What is it about the story that makes it so special that maybe raises it above narratives from other games?
Well, to be honest, I really don't think that the MGS narrative is anything really groundbreaking. I don't think it's anything really shout home about. I don't think the narrative is really better than one game. I don't even think that the MGS narrative has even inspired any other game to feel like it's better than it. I just think it was just a whole new way of telling narrative that was the thing that MGS did better. I don't think it's got the best narrative in the world, but the way it tells it is definitely in a lot more of an interesting way. The fact that you are told 3/4 of the story all through codec screens and through text and quite a lot of voice acting, which is kind of emotionless and kind of, it's just like listening to a radio play and you imagining that the mouth moves with it. But even that way of telling the story wasn't always so effective. When something emotional would happen, say with Meryl, when she goes missing or when she's presumed to be dead, Campbell gives you a call and tries to feel emotional about it. It's so detached, the codec system, that it's kind of hard to really feel emotionally attached to it and like you would an excellent narrative. But I think that Kojima does that on purpose. I think it's just that life of a soldier, that you are so detached from any emotional state, and really Snake is always like that. He's never really one for wanting to feel like, well, he's always learnt never to really respond to his emotions, never to get involved with it, and by delivering a narrative just through a codec system and through flashy cinematics, really sort of develops that distance between you and an emotion that you shouldn't be feeling. So love, understanding, you just carry on being focused on the fact that you've got to do this goal, you've got to finish it, and that's what you're sent here to do. It's just one of those, Kojima's pulling you towards you with one hand and pushing you away with another, and that conflicting feeling is just another way of drawing you into a world. But I don't think the story or the narrative is particularly groundbreaking, but it's told in a conceptual way for a purpose.
And it's stylistic. It's stylistically strong. I agree with you. I don't think it is it's not a particularly great story. And there was a fantastic review of, I think it was MGS4 by Zero Punctuation. They basically said that what Kojima needs is an editor. And I kind of agree with him, you know, like the actual story itself could be cut back a lot and it could be made a lot more lean, and it would still have a lot of the same emotional punch and it would still hit a lot of the same notes.
This is Snake. Colonel, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. What's the situation, Snake?
Looks like the elevator in the back is the only way up.
Just as I expected. I have to take the elevator to the surface, but make sure nobody sees you. If you need to, contact me by codec. The frequency is 140.85. When you want to use the codec, push the select button. When we need to contact you, the codec will beep. When you hear that noise, noise, press the select button. The codex receiver directly stimulates all bones of your ear. No one but you will be able to hear it.
Got it. Okay, I'm ready to go.
I mean, I know what you mean. I mean, it's like what Sam says. He gives and he takes. It's that whole idea of what you were talking about before, Pete, when we were having that change from claustrophobic to agoraphobia. At some points, you've got that sense of dislocation with the codec. And there are moments of connection there with the faces, because the faces do change at certain moments throughout. And I remember, I think this happens, I might have imagined it, when Campbell hears something quite distressing, his face just drops. And you're so used to seeing this solid screen in front of his face, it's quite, whoa. All it does is it highlights you, it just creates another frame, you just got another still picture. And then on the opposite side, you've got this epic sort of cinematography that kind of permeates at certain parts throughout, where in the slow motion scenes where like Sniper Wolf suddenly looking through her scope at you and you hear her breathing, and then she fires and he says, and it's those sort of cinematic moments, and you feel your heart going. It's this pushing and pulling that I think the difference between stealth and the action, again, there's these sort of binary oppositions that Kojima plays with, I think, really quite effectively.
The story's also got a lot of very Japanese-centric character designs and traits within the game. I mean, if we think about some of the bosses, for example, some of the agents within Foxhound, you know, we look at Vulcan Raven, Sniper Wolf, Psycho Mantis, you know, those characters, they are very flamboyant designs. Just imagine this, okay, in the theatre of your mind. Imagine that Metal Gear Solid was actually made on the SNES. You could see how those characters would appear, you know, in a pixelated form, and actually it would just reinforce that it's a very Japanese game. It would be, you know, character designs that wouldn't look out of place in a Final Fantasy game, for example. You know, Vulcan Raven is a large shaman who can control animals to some extent. You know, that's
Giant and shaman, yeah.
Giant and shaman. It's very Japanese in that way, but it was one of those first Japanese games that came over to the West that, when they translated it, it was translated so well that the bosses and these characters took on sort of extra meaning, and they took on subtext and subplot, and there was a reason as to why the shaman loved the Raven so much, and it became a clever sort of shorthand for what this character was like, as opposed to this is just a colourful character who we'll put into a video game. You know, in some ways, these characters in Metal Gear Solid have so much more depth than Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, because you spend so much more time with each of these bosses. I mean, Vulcan Raven, for example, you fight twice. Sniper Wolf, you are constantly harassed by for a fair chunk of the game.
You probably see most bosses twice. You see Psycho Mantis at first in the corridor, then you fight him in the room. You see Vulcan Raven at that first bit in the tank, and then you fight him in
The cold place.
Yeah, you know the place I mean. And then you obviously see Sniper Wolf twice because she shoots Meryl, and then you have to shoot her in the wider expanse just before you put in disc 2. So yeah, you're right. You do spend this sort of time with these characters, and the characters that are fleshed out and have a backstory, and Kojima's not scared of putting that backstory in and hints of it without really explaining their relationship between them. I mean, I think we're very mollycoddled in our relationship with narrative these days, that some people get very used to having things explained to them, having a backstory explained to them. Anyone who's sat through a film while someone sits next to them and says, "Who's that? What are they doing? What's happening now?" knows exactly how distracting that kind of thought can be to just trying to involve yourself in this piece. And you have to learn to accept a narrative like that. And maybe that's why I struggled to get along with MGS quite so well, because it's only sort of now, as my reading tastes have grown, as my watching tastes have grown, as I've watched things like Generation Kill, where they don't make any attempts to explain anything to you. You have to learn your way through the narrative. You have to make the connections. And it's only until I've done that now that I can really appreciate how well the characters are formed within this quite simplistic narrative. And I think if I went back and played Metal Gear Solid again, I'd make those connections a lot easier, and let the narrative and the characters tell the story in the way they were, and not trying to expect everything to explain to me in an ABC fashion.
A lot of people think that Metal Gear is one thing, and it's not, and they unfortunately want it to be more of a game than it actually is. And really, this is the start of kind of interactive fiction and the stuff that, you know, without Metal Gear Solid, I genuinely don't believe that we would have stuff like Fahrenheit Heavy Rain, the work of David Cage. I don't think that we would have stuff like Deus Ex and Warren Spector's work, BioShock, that kind of stuff, because this is the game that kind of took that chance. And rather than just taking a chance on stealth over action, it took narrative over gameplay.
It's making us think about, okay, will our actual world, our real world, get to that point where we're going to have genome soldiers, we're going to get cloning, we're going to have Metal Gears, bipedal tanks that can launch nuclear missiles? And that's a scary part of this as well. Is this game prophecy? That's quite a scary thing to have as well on top of that. And every game has got this sense. There's a theme, a contextual theme woven through all of them that makes you think outside the actual game.
For a game that places so much of its focus on war and on death and shooting guys in the face, it's very, I mean, to me at least, I've always read it as very anti-war and very. The main character is always talking about why there shouldn't be war and how he is just a soldier and how what soldiers have to go through, and wishing that the world didn't have to be like this. I mean, he comes out of retirement, that age-old cliche, he comes out of retirement for this mission, clearly done with war. He's clearly not interested in it anymore, and the narratives are very much, they are very critical of warfare and government in general.
Going back to it now, I kind of feel like I've been spoilt going back to it from it in the subsequent games because of the gameplay. We talked about it earlier. Just that the frustration of not being able to kind of move while in first person and stuff that you can in later games. You do feel really, really kind of constricted. It does feel a lot harder in Metal Gear Solid 1, particularly with the stealth. Not like doing a Mr. Bean and like twatting into another soldier, walking into another soldier and setting off the alert. That kind of frustrating, this turning on the spot, as it were, like in Resident Evil, and making sure that you're crawling and not kneeling instead of doing other things. That jars me gameplay-wise, but in terms of its graphics, its whole sort of mise-en-scène, it's fantastic. I don't want any of that change. I mean, when I was at uni, Paul, I played Twin Snakes on his GameCube, and I didn't enjoy it at all. It didn't feel right. It felt weird being able to see their faces properly. I didn't like the fact that Solid Snake now had a proper face and Liquid, and it was obvious that they were twins. I like the fact that there was kind of a sense of a haze around them. Something that was indecipherable. It made them more mysterious and more enigmatic to an extent. I like that in the game. And it's what I talked about before. The game on the PlayStation has a very distinct texture that I like, and it's too neat and too polished in Twin Snakes. It just doesn't feel right. For me, that's what I love about the landscape of Shadow Moses as well. It's because there's something about it that's so alluring, so irresistible, so mysterious, so frightening. And it all takes place in one place. You're not jet-setting around the world like in number 4. It's like in MGS3. It's all in one place. That's what I like about it. So much goes on in this little place. This labyrinth of tunnels and lifts and corridors and ventilation shafts. I absolutely adore it. I absolutely love going back to that level. Shadow Moses is just one big level, really. I absolutely love it. So yes, it's apart from the gameplay, it's not aged badly at all.
Did anybody go back to it and find at least elements of it weren't as good as they remembered them to be?
For me, the voice acting on Metal Gear Solid, the PS1 edition at least, is a little bit. Some of it's a little bit hit and miss. Especially the one that kind of always gets thrown about is Mei Ling, and she's a little bit of a sort of caricature, in my opinion. When you sort of listen to how she speaks, she's very... I don't want to do an impression because it would sound incredibly racist. She has kind of like take-out Chinese accent, if you know what I mean. Like, that voice actress didn't really put a huge amount of effort into her, I don't think. And they changed that for Twin Snakes, and she sounds a lot better. She sounds a lot more subtle. The sort of Chinese is a lot more subtle. It's a lot more underplayed, understated. But in the original, it's a little bit... It's almost bordering on the sort of offensive in some places. Yeah, that's it, Banzai. It is very sort of Banzai.
Snake, that's a ladies' bathroom.
I know that. Saw Meryl come in here.
So you went in after her? Are you some kind of pervert? I won't let you save your mission now.
Listen, Mei Ling, this is the only place on the base that I can talk to Meryl alone.
Whatever, weirdo. Don't call me again.
So, as you'll see, it was very... it's a little bit awkward, isn't it, really?
You must be crazy to fly a hind in this kind of weather.
Who's that?
Oh, sorry. I haven't introduced you to yet. This is Mei Ling. She was assigned to us as our visual
This is
and
the
data
improved version
processing
of Twin
specialist.
Snakes.
She designed your codec, as well as your Soliton radar system. Contact her if you have any questions about either of them.
Nice to meet you, Snake. It's an honor to speak to a living legend like yourself. What's wrong?
Nothing. I just didn't expect a world-class designer of military technology to be so cute.
You're just flattering me.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. It's still not perfect, but at least in that second one, you do. It is at least she has the ability to say words that have more than E's, I's, A's, and U's in them. You know. The only other thing I would say is that the controls do feel a little bit clunky, and they do feel far too weighted. And the improvements that they went ahead and made for MGS2, just the it just felt a lot more sleek, and it felt a lot more streamlined. For when they moved on to MGS3 and MGS4, it's a very different control scheme again. And again, I think that works very much in the kind of open spaces that they tend to be in. But the control scheme for the original MGS just isn't fantastic, and it's really shocking when you go and play Twin Snakes, or you play the open section in Metal Gear Solid 4 when you revisit the base, just how much has kind of changed and just how different it really is. And it does feel a lot better in Twin Snakes, just from a sort of a smooth kind of a smoothness of movement kind of angle. The visuals actually look more like the drawings in the manual and the art books than they do with the MGS2 engine and onwards. You know, the graphic stylings look really, really strong and very sort of watercolor paint kind of sketches. They look really, really fantastic, and that was kind of lost when the fidelity kind of got increased. I always found, at least.
You know, I'm going to have to disagree with Chris and agree with yourself, Pete. I think, the Twin Snakes version is the only one I own of the first version. I don't know. I just must have got rid of my first copy of Metal Gear Solid, because it was only until sort of a few years later that I realised how important it was. And I've still got that Twin Snakes version for my GameCube. It's right here, and it completes my collection of all the 4 major releases. And I don't think I'd ever maybe played the PlayStation version again. This is the version I will go back to when I want to play this game for another time, because I think it is presented in that cleaner way. A few of the elements are sharpened up. It's even credited in the liner notes of the manual sleeve that certain elements working with Hideo Kojima and Silicon Knights, that they actually worked to tidy up some of the cutscenes, some of the elements of the game, and just refine things to make things appear a lot sharper and sort of bring the game up to a standard and a level. And maybe it was just a thing that Hideo Kojima decided to do off the back of quite a lot of disappointed grumblings about Metal Gear Solid 2. When you play Metal Gear Solid again, there are quite a few little bits of filler, like the bit with the cards, making one hot, making one cold.
Oh, I like that.
Making one normal. Well, it was just a bit of backtracking that I didn't expect. it's kind of all that effort, and then you realise that all you've been doing is finishing off a job that Liquid Snake couldn't be bothered to do himself. All that kind of feels like a little bit, especially when you do it again, you kind of don't want to do it, because you know if you don't do it, everything will be fine. In terms of a story that you are repeating, Metal Gear Solid doesn't really tell itself over again and over and over and over and again really very well, because it's such a story of situationalism and a story of control and manipulation. And there's those points in the story, those bookmarks, which is, well, the only reason you were made to do that is so now I can go and do this. And if you didn't do that, then I wouldn't have been able to do this, and you would have saved the world a lot earlier. And knowing that, and going through the game knowing that you are doing certain things that are causing you distress that is unknown to you, doesn't really sit really well, and the experience of the game is a little hindered by that. But the also good thing about playing MGS1 again is that you realise that, unlike most series and most sequels, is that you realise how much it has progressed game on game on game, and how they've concentrated on different things and moved on in terms of each game, and just made it a better and better series.
I think something that I realised when I replayed it was how much I appreciated other aspects that I hadn't maybe appreciated first time round. As we discussed earlier, I think maybe the first time around I played it, the scene, and probably the scene that really stuck with me, and I probably single out as my favourite, would probably be the whole sequence with Psycho Mantis. Whereas the second time, although again that was fantastic, the part that I really enjoyed was the sequence with Grey Fox, the ninja, and that whole fight scene and that whole dialogue and everything there. And you can tell, I mean, I hadn't really played, I briefly knew the story of the original games where Grey Fox figures again. The dialogue, it creates such a great atmosphere between them, and it really creates a very, very, very good scene and a whole sequence, and it adds a whole new aspect to their battle that they have, which I just didn't, because I was younger, I didn't pick up on that. And so it was great for me to come back to this game and spot something, and notice things that I'd never noticed before, and just with a more mature head on my shoulders, really stand out and go, yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, Psycho Mantis changing the controller port is a really clever thing to do, but this is doing something a lot more subtle and a lot more, in the end, quite powerful as well.
Did you ever read, there was a fantastic article in, I think it was Official PlayStation Magazine, it was either just before MGS2 came out or just afterwards, and they interviewed Hideo Kojima, and he was talking about mortality and how he was really interested in that, how he could try and make that more prevalent in his games. And he came up with the idea of this one title.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of this, yeah.
And he said that they've been working on this disc technology, not Konami themselves, but some scientists had been working on this disc technology, and it did come to fruition. I believe there was a rental company that used this, and essentially when you open up the disc, the idea was that you had it for a certain amount of time, and then the disc kind of went black, and then you could never read it again. And he basically said, like, how cool would it be if there was something in a console that could trigger the ability to turn a disc a different color and therefore not read it again. And he kind of toyed with the idea, and he said that in some ways he wanted to include it in MGS2, but he never thought he could, which was, he said, if you bought the game and then you died in the game would then trigger this thing within this chemical within the disc, go completely black, and you'd never be able to play it again. And he basically said it would be a one-shot game. If you died, and that was your experience, that was your story. And if you didn't see the end of the story that they'd made, it didn't matter, because you still had like a story experience. And I feel that he's always kind of done that. He's always been interested in the duality of video games, whereby you only have one life, and yet video games, there are multiple lives. And if we notice, there's never been a Metal Gear Solid in the main franchise whereby Snake has been able to survive death, like actual death. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. The man is a genius, clearly.
And and that's where we draw a close to the first part in our InRetroSolid series. We've looked at the game that launched the franchise for a new generation of consoles and discussed what impact it's made on our games today. As always, if you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes or the Zune Marketplace and leave us a review. Or let us know what you think on Twitter. You can find our resident InRetroSpect gremlin at InRetroSpect, and the rest of our details can be found at www.inretrospectpodcast.com. Over the next 30 days, you'll get podcasts from Pete, Sam and Chris looking at Metal Gear Solid 2, 3 and 4. In our next show, Pete takes a look at the 2001 title Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. So until then, from all of us at InRetroSpect, it's goodbye.
Snake! What happened? Snake! Snake!
And coming up next week on InRetroSolid, Zero takes his keen eye and looks at the somewhat controversial second entry into the Metal Gear Solid series, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty.
I stare at the stars and the sky.
Hideo's lead for MGS2 was to be the inexperienced mystery man, Raiden, a green soldier that had supposedly only seen combat simulation experience in VR training, with the big shell to be his first real-world mission. Seen as whiny and petulant by fans, Raiden's voice actor Quentin Flynn played Jack as very much the rookie, constantly questioning his orders, becoming paranoid and not believing the extreme situations he is put in. Though fan reaction was poor to this choice, Raiden's speech patterns and behaviour is similar to that of Solid Snake in the first MGS outing. Kojima wishing to retain the newbie element for dramatic effect within the narrative, but not placing it upon Solid Snake, who had already seen floating psychics, mystical shaman, and clones of himself on the battlefield. In this way, to criticise the game for Raiden's inexperienced nature is to criticise the original Metal Gear Solid, an odd choice for those wishing this sequel was more like the first.
That's all still to come next week on InRetroSolid, brought to you by InRetrospectPodcast.com.